Okay, there you have it. We are officially recording this. All right, so I'd like to welcome you to the NASA Alumni League First Thursday program. Today is August 1st, and it is finally feeling like summer here in Houston. We've been waiting a long time. I'm Lisa Spence, and I'll be your host for today. Okay, we're having some dissension among the ranks here in the room. Our speaker today is Miss Michelle Rucker. Michelle began her engineering career in the Houston oil industry, designing downhole sensors while pursuing undergraduate and graduate degrees in mechanical engineering from Rice University. Any owls in the audience? Not today. Okay. She began her NASA career in 1986, soon after the Space Shuttle Challenger accident. She supported the investigation team as a test engineer at the White Sands Test Facility in New Mexico by conducting booster material test and analysis. During the 12 years that she was at White Sands, she supervised hazardous materials tests and managed a hypervelocity impact research laboratory. I couldn't say that very fast. Michelle has served as a systems engineer in the Space Shuttle and International Space Station programs, developing environmental control and life support systems. She supervised spacesuit and extravehicular activity tools projects, and on the constellation programs, Orion and Altair lunar lander test and verification teams. Michelle currently leads the Systems Engineering and Integration Office's cross-agency Mars Architecture Team, or MAT, developing end-to-end crewed Mars mission concepts. Another key element of her role is to ensure there's a deep and talented group of young leaders who are prepared to shepherd humans to Mars and beyond. Michelle hails from Anchorage, Alaska, so this feels hot to her. And one of the strategies that she uses for dealing with the heat in Houston is watching the bear cams in her native Alaska. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Michelle. Yep. This is going to be the PDF. Be good to go. Just advance right there.
Okay, thank you. Afternoon, everybody. So I was watching the folks as they were joining us. There's some names there I haven't seen in a while. So hello to those of you online.
We got kicked off.
If we can solve our communications problems here, we can get them on.
Yeah. That's always our hope. Yeah.
And we could hear fun when she came back, so we're good now, if you can hear me.
Are you seeing charts?
Oh, no charts, but they're coming up, it looks like. Yeah, we got charts.
Mission accomplished. All right. So we'll talk a little bit about where we're at today on our architecture development processes, and then at the end I'll talk a little bit about where we are with Mars. So I don't know if any of you were involved in or paid attention to the last 2 years. We've been doing these things called architecture concept reviews. We've had a couple of public workshops. If you've been to any of the big conferences, you've probably seen Pam Miller. I think we get kicked off again. My apologies.
No, it's not you, it's us.
Really, the communications to Mars will be much more reliable, we hope.
Okay. So I can get rid of this.
All right, so if you've heard Pam Melroy talk about the three pillars of exploration, what she says is everybody's got a reason that they think we should do space exploration. Not everybody agrees on what those reasons are, but everybody's reasons kind of maps into this little Venn diagram here. There's the science, the people that are interested in the science things. There's the inspiration. I mean, we've seen that, all the way, back to before Apollo. And then there's the national posture, the national pride for why we do what we do. A couple of these things overlap, but in general, everybody has a stake in one of these three things. So that was sort of the foundation for the exploration, the blueprint for exploration is what the agency is calling it now. To put things into historical context, I mean, most of you have been involved in programs that got canceled, and there was, emotional angst over cancellations. Historically, what we do is we charge off and go try to do something. We don't get the money to do it, and then we check out that plan and go try to do something else. We've just sort of been on a roller coaster over time. So the agency recognizes that we needed an approach that was going to be a little bit more resilient to that, the political cycle as space kind of comes and goes in and out of vogue. One of the tenets now is we're saying, we shouldn't just check out the plan if we don't get enough money to fund the whole plan this year. Let's do what we can do this year just to try to keep that constancy of purpose going rather than just check it out and start over again every couple of years. So with all that in mind, the agency developed a set of Moon to Mars exploration objectives. There is a document online, there's a scan code down here, but if you just go into your browser and type NASA Moon to Mars architecture, a whole web page will come up with these documents that I'm about to show you. The objectives are very high levels. What is it we want to accomplish? Now, historically, what we do is somebody sells us on a capability, and then we go try to design a mission to go use that capability. We're kind of turning that around now, and we're saying, well, what is it we want to go do? And then let's go develop the capabilities that will allow us to do those things. So it's more of an objectives-based approach that will provide a little bit of the resiliency. If you have this goal in mind, you want to go meet these objectives, then that gives you a little bit of constancy of purpose. The other thing that Pam Melroy has really been a big advocate for is having more and enhanced communication with our external stakeholders as well as our internal stakeholders. She is big on transparency. She's really pushing us to share more of the sausage making as we go through our processes, rather than we'll just have a big press conference at the end and at the launch day and show you what we went and did. So all of this is, we kind of sum it up as the architecting from the right. So again, historically, we would say, hey, we've got this cool thing that we developed. Let's go design a mission around it. And for those of you who remember the asteroid redirect mission, that's kind of the poster child for that approach, right? We had an Orion, we had a rocket. What can we go do with that? So, we're going to go visit an asteroid. Well, we didn't really put together the why. The why was just because we had these things lying around and we were trying to look for a way to use them. But the science was kind of thin, right? Even the asteroid scientists were like, well, yeah, you could go do that, but is that the most important science to be doing? Probably not. So this whole architecting from the left, where we have a thing that we spent a whole bunch of money on, and by gosh, we better figure out a way to get our money's worth out of that and then develop a mission. We're kind of chucking that out, and we're saying, look, let's figure out what it is we want to do. Where is it we want to go? What do we want to do there? And then let's develop those tools that will help us get there. So in the document that I just showed you, there's a series of sort of the high level recurring tenets. And these are just kind of common sense. Yes, you will hear people propose one-way missions to Mars. The US government's not going to do that, right? That's just not something that the US government is ever going to be able to go out and promote. If the industry wants to do that, you go do that. If you can find volunteers that want to do that, that will sign the waivers, you go do that. But that's not really that's not really where we're at. So it's things like we want to make the maximum use of crew time. We don't, it's very expensive to send crew into space. We don't want them sitting around, looking for things to do. International collaboration. We just get more done and more efficiently, and it just brings more to the table when we have international collaboration. Same with industry collaboration. The responsible use. I mean, these are things that we've, that you see in like the international treaties that we've signed. So basically, these recurring tenets are sort of the guide rails for the architecture development. But then we have a set of 4 categories of exploration objectives. Science is a little bit unique because it is both a pillar and its own category of objectives, but there are these other objectives that are not science that fit kind of that other parts of the Venn diagram. So there's both lunar and Mars infrastructure. So the technology development folks have some infrastructure goals that they would like to see on both the Moon and Mars. Transportation and habitation, we're not sending humans anywhere without those 2 things. And then operations. So each of the 4 mission directorates in NASA crafted their own objectives. These were the 4 that were non-science. Then within science, there's a whole bunch of subsets of these objectives. There's the lunar and planetary science, the heliophysics, all of this stuff. Again, the science mission directorate developed these. It wasn't the engineers saying, hey, we're going to the moon. We'll give you 20 minutes on the moon. Tell us how much science you can get done. We're letting each of the mission directorates establish their own objectives. And then we're looking for capabilities that will help us integrate those objectives and meet those objectives in a mission design. So again, the architecture strategy is taking these goals and objectives and architecting from that right-hand side. What's the end state that we're looking for? Where is it we're trying to go? What are we trying to do? And then let's develop architectures that will help us get there. So now I'm going to get down a little bit more into the sausage making. So you guys all are familiar with 7120 and all of the life cycle review processes. That's all great once Congress approves a project and you're off and running, but there was sort of a gap on how you get there, that pre-implementation part of it. What are the processes for that? So this is where this new process kind of fits in there. So instead of running off to Congress and saying, hey, give me a bunch of money to go build this rocket, we're saying, here's where we want to go, here's what we want to do, and here's the kind of rocket we would need to be able to get there, and here's how much it would cost. And so now there's that traceability to what the end goal is. It's not just give me a bunch of money so I can go build some fun toys. So the traceability is really important. And what we're seeing is OMB likes this approach. They like knowing what the purpose of the investment is, not just give me some money so I can go build some stuff and then you get to see it launch and it'll be really cool, trust us. So we're developing this whole architecture framework. We're starting with the objectives. We're decomposing those down. I'll go into the sausage making of that a little bit. Once a year, we're having an architecture concept review. This is a new kind of a milestone event for the agency. It is not program specific. It is sort of NASA inclusive. So all of the mission directorate leads, all of the AAs are invited to this. We've had 2 now. We did one in January last year, and then we did another one in November. The next one will be this November. So this will be our 3rd architecture concept review. And basically, what we do with these architecture concept reviews is we get agency-wide consensus to add elements into the architecture. So we're going through these processes, developing which capabilities we think we need, identifying the elements that will give us those capabilities, and then we add it to the architecture. And we do that in a, it's not just the, you know, one directorate at one center going off and trying to sell someone to pay for something. This is an agency-wide process that we're doing now. Once the architecture concept review reviews the architecture updates, we have industry, academia, and international partner workshops where we socialize what happened at the ACR with everyone external. So that's that transparency part that Pam's really big on, making sure that we are communicating with the public as we go, what we're doing and how we're doing it. And then we publish these products. So the scan code will take you to those products. So it's just a picture of the ACR and the workshop. The ACR, again, it's a agency-wide thing. The AAs from all the mission directorates are there. Pam Elroy was there last year. Basically, all of the tech authorities are there. Everybody's represented. They go around the room. It's kind of like a flight readiness review where everybody concurs, yes, this is a good thing to go do in the architecture. I want to make it clear this isn't, it was sort of started by the human spaceflight side of the family, but it's not just the human spaceflight side of the family. It also overlaps into the operations side and the science side and the technology development side. Everybody together is coming in saying, yeah, that's a good thing to go invest in, so that we have capabilities that don't just do a single purpose sort of a thing. And let me give you, this is kind of in the news these days. You've probably read about the Mars sample return mission. So we got into some cost trouble. And that's an example of where that predated this whole process. But that is being re-looked at now. How would that mission actually fit into the architecture? What capabilities does that development provide that can push forward on some of these objectives, can advance some of our operations objectives, so that it's being re-looked at in that lens now. So this is just gets into the sausage making. If you go to the scan code, and we'll show it again at the end. So the premise of the architecting from the right was we start with the objectives and goals, and we decompose those into characteristics and needs. And let me give you an example of how this is useful. I was in a design meeting about the lunar terrain rover, and someone from the science mission directorate said, it has to have 3 cameras on it. And I said, well, I can mount 3 cameras on the roof pointed at the sky, and that will meet your requirement, but is that really going to do what you need it to do? And they said, well, no, I need it pointing here, there, and everywhere. And I'm like, that's what I need to know. Don't just tell me you need 3 cameras. That's kind of a stupid requirement. And we historically have jumped straight to requirements, right? It's got to have wheels. It's got to be this propulsion system. It's got to have windows. We jump straight to a requirement without thinking through what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish. So we're saying, no. Okay, how does that map to an objective or a goal? Well, I need the cameras for science. I need to take pictures of things for science. All right. So let's decompose that. So then we go down into the characteristics and needs. What kind of resolution do you need? What is it you're trying to film? And that will kind of drive what those characteristics and needs are. And then we look at use cases. Those are sort of examples of how we would use a capability. And finally, we get down to functions. Once we get all the way down there, now we're ready to start talking about requirements. Don't just go jumping straight to the purple and give me requirements. Let's make sure we have traceability so that if I build the thing to those requirements, it will actually trace back and meet those objectives. And it's really, really hard for engineers and for anyone who's worked at NASA more than about a week yeah, everybody wants to jump straight to requirements. That's just how we are. That's just the way we're wired. So this has been a really interesting process the last 2 years to kind of pull everybody back and say, hold on, let's, tell me how that maps to your objectives. So again, more about objective decomposition. We've tried to map some of these things to kind of get you down, because because everybody in industry wants to go sell us something, right? They're like, yeah, I don't care about that. Just tell me what you need to buy so I can go build that for you and make some money. And so we're publishing some of these mapping tables so that industry, again, for the transparency, can kind of see what it is we're thinking and which capabilities we think we need to develop. And then finally, you get down to where you're at with the requirements flow down. So this is on the implementation side. This isn't on the architecture side. We set what the architecture needs to be able to do, and then the actual requirements get set on the implementation side within the program. So this would be within the Artemis program, within the EVA suit design program, things like that. So where are we at with how the architecture fits together? There's sort of three things to think in terms of there's mission segments. So if you're paying attention to Artemis, we're not going to go build Moon City on the first mission, right? Just like we didn't on Apollo 11. We did not send a construction crew with Apollo 11 to go build Moon City. So you're going to do a sort of a segmented approach. What is it we want to bite off in that first human lunar return? And then what is it we're going to do in the next segment, which would be more of a sustained exploration. Same thing with Mars. We are not building Mars City on day one. We're going to be doing a little bit of exploration. We don't even know where we would want to build Mars City until we do a little bit of exploration. So it'll be a segmented approach. Then within those segments, we have these sub-architectures. And that's, you guys have all worked MELs, that's just sort of a collection, like communication systems. That's a sub-architecture. That's not, it's not just one piece of equipment. For a communications sub-architecture, you need the antenna, you need the power system to drive it, you need potentially orbital assets, you need surface assets, you need Earth assets. So it's this sort of a collection of those things that make up a sub-architecture. And then there's the individual elements. And this is where we all want to be. We all want to be designing elements. But we're trying to put those elements in a framework. The problem in the past is we charged off and built an element, and then we found out it didn't really fit any of what we needed it to do. We had a thing that was great, but it wasn't going to do what we wanted it to do. All right, so the segments for initially the human lunar return, that's the first couple Artemis missions to the moon. Then there's the foundational exploration, that's being there a little bit longer. And then there's the sustained lunar evolution. This is where we kind of are moving away from being the anchor tenant on the moon and starting to get commercial engagement a little bit more there. And then the first segment for Mars would be just the initial humans to Mars segment. Sub-architectures, this is in work. These are being developed. This looks like a MEL to you guys, right? There's nothing here that you don't understand. These are some of the elements that are being developed, and they're sort of in the, I know we're architecting from the right, moving backwards, but as far as implementation, we're going from the left towards the right. So this is just some of the elements you've heard about: Orion and SLS and commercial lunar, the CLIPS payloads, commercial lunar payload services, things like that. So again, laid out here with the segments in the arrow moving towards the later segments on the other side there. So a lot of international partners, industry partners, they kind of roll their eyes and say, yeah, but whose door do I need to knock on to sell you something? I want you to buy my thing. How do I get involved? Where do I interface with your process here? So this sort of lays out, most people jump in around the acquisition strategy part, right? We've done a couple studies, and then boom, we go to the ninth floor and we have an acquisition strategy plan, and let's go ask Congress for some money. Let's go buy some stuff. We're saying, whoa.
They agree with you.
All right. So now we're saying, well, hold the horses here. Before we run off and do an acquisition planning meeting, let's do our architecture studies. Let's not skip all the stuff in the middle here. Let's identify which technology gaps we have. Is there research and development we need to fill some of those gaps? We have the mission concept trades. We have You know, element initiation, that's a new thing. That is a kind of a new milestone review. Then that gets an element into the architecture. Once it's in the architecture, then you have something you can go ask for money for. So that predates the acquisition strategy. Again, all of this is in the document that I showed you at the beginning. So this is just a summary of how the documentation will help our both industry and academia and international partners figure out how they can, you know, work with us. Where do they insert their ideas into our processes? So some of the products, we've got what we call an architecture definition document. The architecture definition document is it gets updated annually coming out of the architecture concept review. And it's sort of a summary of where the Moon to Mars architecture stands as of today. It's a snapshot for today. So at each subsequent ACR, we will add new elements to the architecture, and then we update that document. The too long didn't read, you can jump to the Moon to Mars executive overview. That gives you a very high level, it's a shorter, maybe 14-page document. The first document is a couple hundred pages long. It's not an exciting read, I'm not gonna lie to you. But the Moon to Mars architecture executive overview, it kind of gives you the quick read. And then we've started releasing a series of white papers. We've got about more than a dozen out now. These kind of explain the why we did what we did, why we decided what we decided, or what the challenges were that drove us to making certain architecture decisions. It's the sort of the frequently, why didn't you do it this way? Back when I was here 20 years ago, we were going to do it this way. Why didn't you just keep doing it that way? Some of these white papers explain some of that evolution over time. We typically release those white papers at the end of the cycle after the concept review. We had a couple of mid-cycle papers that came out. These are just big things that are kind of important to people. People are asking a lot of questions now. So there's two new white papers that just got released. One on lunar surface cargo, that's been in the news a lot lately, and one on lunar mobility drivers. And everyone's looking at rovers right now, so that was an important paper. So now I'm ready to talk about Mars. All right, so Joe and I were talking. He kind of rolled his eyes like, yeah, we're finally going to go to Mars, right? The joke among those who worked Mars, you probably have all heard this joke, is 50 years ago, we were 30 years away from Mars. 20 years ago, we were 30 years away from Mars, and now we're still 30 years away from Mars. When I first took over the Mars architecture team, the thing that frustrated me is there were piles and piles and piles of studies. Somebody was just at the Ascend conference this week and said there were over 1,000 Mars studies. And that's, you know, everybody's studies. This is just a small snapshot of just probably some of you were involved in some of these studies. I know Joe was in some of them. We have been doing studies since von Braun. One of the first studies was published a week after we landed on the moon, and it was given by von Braun. And we've been studying Mars for 50 years, but when you look at how many decisions we've actually made, does anybody know how many decisions we've made about Mars? 0. We have not made a single decision about 0. You think that we have, because you've heard someone give a speech that said, we're planning to be on Mars by 2039. Nobody actually made that decision. Ask for the decision package. It doesn't exist. So in order to get humans to Mars, we have to stop doing studies and start making decisions. So this has been my personal goal, is to get the agency to start making decisions about Mars. So one of the things that we've started doing is we've been trying to map decisions. The first thing we did is we brainstormed what are all the big architecture decisions that need to be made. Things like how many people we're going to send, how long are we going to stay, where are we going to land, how long are we going to stay there when we land. We cataloged over 100 key decisions. So there's 100 decisions that need to be made. If I go to my boss and say, hey boss, you got 100 decisions to make, he's going to throw me out. right? His question is going to be, well, where do I start? What's the first decision that I need to make? So what we've been doing, we have the benefit of tools that Von Braun didn't have. We can use some of the system engineering modeling tools and techniques that are available now to map what we call either the prerequisites or the flow downs, the decision relationships, right? So what the architecture looks like depends on which decision you make first, right? It really comes down to 6 key things: who, what, where, when, why, and how, right? If you go back and look historically at Apollo, what got decided first was when. We were going to the moon in 1969. Well, where and when. We're going to the moon and it's gonna be 1969. That was set. Every architecture decision we made was influenced by those 2 things. We had to go to the moon, and we had to get there by 1969. So how many people we send, that was an output of what we could manage to get done before the end of the decade. How we did it, the propulsion system selection, we had to go with stuff that was close to being ready to go. We didn't have the luxury of doing too many new technologies just because we had to get going here. So it worked. We accomplished, the objective was to get there before the end of the decade. We did that. But is that the best way to develop an architecture? There's a reason we didn't go back again, right? That architecture couldn't keep people there for a month. That architecture couldn't go every week. That architecture was really limited in what it could do because it was designed for the one thing, and it did it, but it wasn't a good architecture to go beyond that one thing. So this gets back to the objectives, right? Don't just pick one objective and design and put all your money into making that one thing. What you should do is figure out all of the things you want to do, parse out what do you want to do first, and then design an architecture that can get you those things. Preferably it's extensible to do the next set of things beyond that after you do that. So we've been electronically mapping how these decisions relate to each other and trying to figure out where do we start? Which are the most important decisions to make first? Every decision will get made. Every decision is important, but my boss cannot make 100 instantaneous decisions all at once, right? You know how these decision boards go. They're going to spend some time mulling things over. You can't bring them 100 data packages and expect them to make 100 simultaneous decisions. So we've got to figure out what the priorities are. In doing the mapping that we've done, color key is the who, what, where, when, why, how. We've got kind of a mix. We've got 7 key decisions that we picked for the current analysis cycle that we're just now coming out of. And it's a kind of an interesting mix of decisions. So we went to the ACR last year. We said, we recommend that the agency focus on these 7 to start with. And most of the other decisions will be heavily influenced by these, but this is a pretty good place to start. Most of these, you don't have to make another decision before you get to one of these, but almost all of these have flow down decisions to other things. So this was a good place to start. So starting up at the top, what's the initial human Mars segment target state? So for Apollo, the target state was boots on the moon. I just needed pictures of boot prints and that was it. So if your target state, your desired target state was to stay for a week or to stay, to build an infrastructure there, that architecture didn't do it with Apollo. So what is it we want from Mars? What is our desired target state for the first segment? It's probably not Mars City. It's probably going to be something like Apollo, preferably more than just a couple hours on the first mission, because this is a long way to go. If you're only going to stay 3 hours, that's kind of disappointing. What's the number of crew to the vicinity? And what's the number of crew to the surface? Those might be 2 different numbers. So some people are proposing we just go to Mars, orbit, and come home again without landing. And the reason they want to do that is because that lets you push off your lander and ascent vehicle development until later. So from a political point of view, from a funding point of view, from a management point of view, some people like that. Other people are like, yeah, that's like taking your kids to Disney World, driving around the parking lot, but telling them they can't get out. They can just look at Mickey in the parking lot and then we're going home. And so how is that really what we want to do? So those 2 And it might be something in between. We might send 4 crew to orbit and only 2 land and 2 stay in orbit. That's kind of what we did with Apollo, right? Not everybody got to go land the first time. So these are kind of pretty big decisions, right? Number of crew is a huge one. I always use the space shuttle example. How many crew were in the very first shuttle mission? 2. How many crew were in the second shuttle mission?
2.
Is back with us online?
You're back.
Yeah, we can hear you
Okay.
now.
Okay, we're trying to get the charts back up.
I think the charts are going to be available. So
Yeah.
the black hole period where you weren't hearing us, you can go back and pull those.
Do I get back? Let me drop this a little bit. It's not letting me share. It's not letting me grab the host role again, which is the problem.
Did they have access to the charts? Because we can just tell them what page we're on.
I can, they don't have them right now, but we can post that out there. I think we're pretty close to the end, actually.
Yeah.
I think there's only a few more charts. Okay, for those of you online, we got dropped off the internet and we were reconnected to Zoom so you can hear us, but we cannot, for some unknown reason, share the screen. So Michelle only has a couple more charts left to present. So we will make the charts available as well as the recording. So just so you know.
That will be wonderful.
Just leave me alone. Okay.
All right.
We'll just
So,
let you keep going.
sorry about that. So the Mars loss of crew risk posture. How risky? We started becoming a little bit more risk averse as we got into more routine space operations on shuttle and ISS. Going to Mars will be more like where we were going into the unknown in the Apollo days. So are we going to continue with the shuttle ISS risk posture, which is going to drive a lot of design choices, or are we gonna lean forward a little bit more and be a little bit more risk tolerant when we go to Mars? That's kind of what's the appetite? That will inform a lot of our decisions. So it's important to know that up front. What you don't want to do is make an assumption, design and build stuff, and then have the bosses say, "I know we're not flying that. That's too risky." So we want to know in advance what the tolerance is going to be. And then the last of these 7 decisions is the Mars surface power generation technology. If you guys paid attention to the robotic science missions, you know, there's 2 robots on Mars that are happy and healthy, and they have one thing in common. And there's a whole bunch of robots that are not so happy or healthy, and they all have one thing in common. And that is the difference between solar power versus nuclear power. Nuclear power is impervious to the dust storms. It's impervious to the day-night cycle. It's pretty reliable. When you're a robot and a dust storm kicks up and it might last for 4 months and it blots out the sun. So people think, oh, well, we'll just send dust wipers. Well, the dust is suspended in the atmosphere. And if the solar rays can't see the sun, you can keep wiping them all you want, but it ain't getting any energy. So knowing what you know about humans and how much power they need, how much are you going to pucker if you're relying on solar power for a human Mars mission? So this is a decision that I think we've got enough data thanks to the science, robotic science missions. We could wait another 50 years. Maybe someone will design even better solar arrays and better energy storage. But if we don't want to wait 50 years before we start planning, we should make a decision now and go with what we have.
So has that been made?
Is that
Decision?
no? That decision is that one's ginned up and getting ready to go forward to a decision maker in the next couple of months. That we're hoping to get that decision. Now that's not going to be the implementation side. That's just the which technology of the two technologies available, which one do we want to put crew risk into? And then once we make that decision, then we'll kick it over the fence to the implementation side to go look at how you would implement that. So that's kind of a snapshot of where we've gotten to on the architecture. It's I know that was kind of a fire hose of information, a lot of sausage making there. If you go to this is the architecture homepage here. All these documents, the white papers are there. If you're interested in Mars, we got about half a dozen white papers on different aspects of Mars that are kind of interesting. There's some lunar ones there. There's some pretty cool. They're relatively short, maybe 4 or 5 pages long. Lots of pictures, so easy to digest. So I think I'm ready to take questions. Joe.
Questions?
Okay, so for those of you, hang on a second. For those of you who are online, if you could please type your questions into the chat, and we're going to take a couple questions from the room first, and then we'll get to the ones that are coming from online.
Joe was first with his hand up.
Okay.
You're addressing me?
Yeah.
What, in a realistic time frame, are you talking about in establishing all these programs?
So for for those of you online, the question is, what's the time frame for establishing these aspects? So obviously the Artemis program, they're off and running. They've gotten a couple of new elements initiated. They're starting to get past that pre-formulation part. Now, on the lunar side, they sort of inherited some decisions, right? That predated this whole process. But there have been some new capabilities that are working their way into the architecture. And in the next series of workshops, which will be in February, so we're going to do the architecture concept review in November, and then you'll be getting some new information on some of the lunar capability, the new lunar capabilities in February. There'll be a public workshop for that. On the Mars side, we're early in the process of doing the decision road mapping. Once we start making decisions, so for example, the power decision, if we make a decision on which technology, that's a capability. Now we throw it over the fence to the technology mission directorate to start developing that to the point where we can take it into implementation.
How much are you relying on the results of Artemis for the
So Joe's asking, how much are we relying on Artemis to further our Mars ambitions? The reason the surface power decision is one of the first 7 here, that is not a decision I have to make today for Mars, but my window of opportunity to influence Artemis is closing. So the reason we prioritized that decision was so we could get to a technology decision and then have Artemis demonstrate it for us to be absolutely sure we're ready to take it to Mars. So we are definitely, I mean, we're in lockstep. We're all in the same office together now. That's kind of a new thing. It was always, the lunatics were off kind of on, in their own sandbox, and the Martians were in their own sandbox, and they were just at odds with each other. We're all in the same office now. Repeat that again?
say all of those requirements are kind of putting a little burden on Artemis, which then relies on whatever their date's gonna be.
So the power decision would not be, that's not related to the first mission. So they're immune from that decision. But if I know what kind of power technology I want to use on Mars, I'll feed that into Artemis as they develop requirements, and then ideally they'll develop a power system for the moon, and this would be for a longer stay on the moon. Technically, if you go to the south pole of the moon, you get a little bit of sunlight. You don't technically need the nuclear power option, but it gives you a lot more capability. It's easier to survive lunar night, things like that. So we want to infuse those needs into the architecture for the moon so they can demonstrate those technologies on the moon. Let's just build one power system. We'll roll the dash number and take it to Mars later without having to, completely develop something new. But we're trying to be respectful of the timelines and not put too much burden on the early lunar missions.
Let me take the first online question. This one right here. Artificial intelligence.
Is artificial intelligence in terms of tools, analyses, resources being used in I got a thing that any way to help decision makers address any of those numerous decisions? Artificial intelligence is, if you know a little bit about that, it can be garbage in, garbage out if you're not careful with it. You have to train the artificial intelligence to be intelligent before it's actually useful. And so for things where you have a lot of data, you can apply that. So where artificial intelligence is being infused into some of the decisions. So for example, some of the medical technologies, they are looking to AI to help with some of that. As far as making architecture decisions, we're not quite there yet. It's been somewhat of a manual process based on a lot of the historical studies that have done, a lot of the heritage studies. But we are databasing all those studies. We're putting them into what we call a Mars Control Console. So the 50 years, the 1,000 studies is going into a database that would eventually be able to help train an AI system, but we're not quite there yet. But right now we're looking at that database as when someone says, well, hey, did you ever think about doing it like this? We can say, yeah, did it 3 times. Here's the 3 studies. You can go read the report on why that didn't work.
Questions in the room?
We had one more.
Allison?
I have a question about one of the main goals or main tenets of interoperability. It's not easy to achieve when you're granting independent contracts to vendors who have wide-ranging leeway to design as they wish, and some of whom do not necessarily like to play in the sandbox with others. So on the space station, we started with really good interoperability, and then we brought in the Russians, and all of that flew out the window, including language and everything else. So how do you do that with multiple suit vendors, multiple rover vendors, and all of that? Are we really going to have interoperability between Lunar and Mars and all of these commercial vendors?
That's a topic that has come up at we host these industry and IP workshops.
Sort of summarize the question.
I'm sorry. Yeah, for those online, the question is are we really going to be able to implement interoperability given all the challenges we've had on international programs like ISS? That is something that there's a whole group of people working that. I know there was for ISS as well. That comes up a lot. Like you said, a lot of companies or countries want to keep their secret sauce secret. They don't really want other things docking to them or sharing their resources. So that is a challenge. We list it as a recurring tenet. That is the goal. We'll see where we get to.
Take another one on the line. Where is the, I don't know what that means. Any special qualifications? You've already answered this one.
So, any special qualifications for Mars crew, for instance, should two be married? That's a great question. So, there's a lot of research going on. Here at JSC, we're doing the CHIPEA, the year-long Mars. It's a Mars analog. If you, those of you who have access on site, if you haven't gotten a tour of CHIPEA, you should see if someone can get you. You have to go. You have to see it between crews, between missions. It's a 3D printed habitat, which is kind of cool. It's a 4-crew habitat, and it's a health and performance. We've done a lot of analog studies, like Antarctic studies, where people overwinter. We've looked at things like that. But there is a lot of research going on about, what's the appropriate crew complement? Is an odd number of people better than an even number of people? There's a lot of those research activities going on. And again, so that kind of research data will inform the crew selection, how many crew decisions that we have to make. You'd have to talk to the medical folks on what the qualifications are. I assume it will be similar to the way we selected shuttle or Apollo astronauts as well. Mars is going to be a really long mission. It's shocking how far away Mars is. People don't think about it. When we see pictures of the solar system, everything looks close to each other. But it is a couple year-long mission, so you have to get along with your crewmates pretty well. Let's see, we got the decision. Yeah, the decision-making process is beyond complicated. Has anyone thought about using AI to help? Yeah, we get asked that a lot. We do have a system engineering model that we're using, where we are using electronic methods. But first you have to sort of, it is very complicated, but it's something that humans kind of have to be involved in. First of all, what is the thing that needs to get decided? We have long drag out fights over what it is that actually has to get decided, even the number of crew. We get into arguments of, well, do we set a minimum? Is one appropriate? Historically, we've never sent one person to the surface, but we have left one person in orbit. Will we ever do that again? So what is it that we're trying to decide? Are we trying to decide that maximum number for a particular mission, or are we trying to, trying to optimize the architecture for what are the variations between missions? So that's a kind of thing that, until you've trained an AI system to even consider all of the arguments, the pros and cons, you can't just push a button and expect AI to give you an answer to that. So the short answer is not yet. Eventually, probably, but not yet.
Where in your decision and questions falls the propulsion technology to transport you from low Earth orbit to rendezvous with Mars?
So the question in the room is, where on the decision roadmap is the transportation propulsion technology decision? Historically, the conventional wisdom was that has to be the most important decision, right? And only because it's the long pole. But until I know where I'm trying to go, how many people I'm trying to haul, how long I'm going to be gone, even things like ISRU, there's some places on Mars, yes, there's places where you can land and get water ice and fill up a tank to come home again, but not everywhere. There's places on Mars where there is no ice. If that's where the scientists want to go, someplace where you can't get ISRU, if you go off and build that propulsion system, it's not going to do the thing that you need it to do. So that's why the science objectives were one of the anchoring decisions, because it's going to tell us where on the planet we want to go. If they want to go to ice, that opens up some of those ISRU options that you wouldn't have at the equator, for example.
If you use the wrong propulsion system, it takes you twice as long to get there. So you got to manifest twice as much supplies. You probably can't afford the bill is what I'm saying is. But if you choose that propulsion, which I'm thinking has to be nuclear, you have to start that development project. You know, if you look at any of the military airplane developments, it takes them 12 years to develop a new propulsion variation of the jet engine.
Which
So-
is why we've already started the nuclear technology developments. That's already in work. But there's 4 different propulsion system technologies that are in development right now. All 4 of them are being worked on. There's also solar electric propulsion. We're going to do that on Gateway. There's the nuclear propulsion, the Draco projects, looking at that. STMD just signed the thing with DARPA. The all chemical transportation system, that's what industry wants to do, but that requires a big infrastructure on the surface of Mars in order to fill it up and then get home again. And then there's a variation of a couple of those nuclear electric propulsion. It would use the electric thrusters that we would use for solar electric propulsion, but pair it with a nuclear reactor. So it's just a little bit different. Yeah, like that. So, but all 4 of those are in development. So nobody's just sitting on their hands waiting until the decision gets made. But I don't yet know how I would use that propulsion system, or whether, in the case of the ISRU based one, I don't even know if that's practical for where we want to go or how long we want to stay. So until I know some of those decisions, it would be premature to pick a propulsion system.
Let's see if there's any questions on the line. There are, yeah. That's probably a good one.
So online, there's a question, where are the objectives of the exploration and development of space narrative found? If you go to the blueprint for exploration, if you just go to that scan code that was on that last page, that takes you to there's a bunch of documents you can find the narrative for that. Let's see, another question. The first EVA on Apollo was 2 hours, 18 minutes. Apollo 17 had 22 hours, 40 minutes. The plan was to keep evolving, not flags and footprints. Mike Griffin and Doc Horowitz presaged SLS and Artemis by decades, yet here we are with this complex architecture that has so many questions and appears to be a technology demonstration program, not a return to the moon to mine resources in the South Pole. I don't think there's a question in here. There's an opinion.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, any other questions in the room? Yes, sir.
Well, I'm glad you brought up requirements, because I was hating for that. So as you're developing the requirements, are you also developing the verifications on those requirements?
That's on the implementation side, not the architecture side.
But, okay.
So repeat the question.
The question is, as we're developing requirements, are we developing verifications? I assume the programs are doing that. That's just standard practice.
If you've got a requirement that you can't verify, then
Right.
you're either stuck or you get whatever requirement.
Right.
Okay, I'm good. Okay, so you've answered, yes, you are looking into it.
Well,
Or
I'm
somebody-
on the architecture team. The implementation side, the programs are looking
Right,
at that.
so whoever's running the requirement should be
Stokes.
Or you haven't to battle Congress yet on any design concept. You know, like they really helped us a lot on the SLS. Are they helping us a lot on this concept yet?
So I will say that I mean, I don't brief Congress, so I don't have firsthand knowledge. The word that has come down to us is that the decision makers who fund us, including OMB and Congress, they like this approach because they can see what the end goal is, not just buy me a toy. I mean, you guys were all in programs where it sounded like, Daddy, I want a pony, buy me a pony, right? And it wasn't clear what we were going to use it for. It was really cool. We should go build this, but what are you going to do with it? Now we're saying, here are the things we want to go do, and here's how these elements will help us do those things. And they like that traceability. That is the probably fifth-hand information down to me at my level, but it seems to and let me tell you another thing. We've been contacted by a lot of other agencies asking for us to give presentations on this process because they're looking at what they can learn in their agencies to do it. I just got asked yesterday to come brief the National Academy's Committee for Air Force Studies. The Air Force is looking at capabilities development and technology, how you fuse the capabilities development and technology together into an implementation. So they just want to hear from us on what we're doing, how we're doing it, to see if there's applicability in their world. So I can tell you that the process seems to be resonating outside of NASA.
How mature is the case for going to Mars? Do we have a story yet that's sellable, or viable, I guess?
Yeah, it's so the question is how strong is the case for going to Mars? Do we have a viable? We don't have a viable architecture yet. You guys work at the Johnson Space Center. You know that the weak link in any architecture is the human. The reason we didn't stay on the moon very much longer than we did in 1969 is because we didn't actually have the human system capabilities to keep crew happy and healthy for extended periods of time. That we started to learn that with ISS, and there's new stuff that's shown up even on ISS that we didn't know about in the 60s. Some of the health issues, some of the long-term performance degradation issues, food shelf life. I mean, that's a big deal. So I think the engineering challenges, those of you who are engineers, we can engineer our way around anything, right? If you just throw enough money at it, we can come up with an engineering solution. But we can't build better humans, right? There are going to be limitations on the humans. And so there's only so much we're going to be able to do. We'll have to engineer around their limitations, which might mean having to use something like nuclear transportation to get there and back as fast as we can, just because the humans really are going to struggle to adapt to very, very long missions in space. So
I think his question is more when the public or Congress says, why are we spending this money to go to Mars when we have people starving? So do we have the why for going to Mars that will answer the question for the public?
So the clarification in the room is, do we have the answer for the public on the why we would go to Mars when there's people starving here on Earth?
Is that your question?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Are we ready to sell it yet, or we're just going to work the moon first, and then we're still working this Mars?
So that goes back to the three pillars of why, right? So everybody has a stake in one of those. So yes, people will say, well, there's people starving. Why would we do this? They don't think we should spend any money on space anywhere. But some of the technologies that we develop will help make life better here. So some of the science and some of the research and some of the inspiration still fits even with people that don't think we should be wasting money. They see it as a waste of money. I am not a politician. I am just an engineer. So it's not my job to sell anybody on it. It's my job. Was that a question or an open mic?
It's an open mic.
Girl, here on Lachlan. Katie's gonna make you dinner. I'm gonna go up and get dressed to take Ernst to her birthday party.
Okay.
Look you. Who are you
All right,
looking at?
somebody has an open mic, please mute your
Enjoy.
mics.
Enjoy.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I think everybody should be muted now. That's just a more commentary. I think we're done with questions. All right, any more questions? Okay.
So Elon Musk seems to have a pretty clear definition of architecture and how he wants to go to Mars. Are these parallel efforts? Is there any cooperation between NASA and him, or is he just going to blow NASA away and just go do it before you guys decide how to do it?
I mean, NASA doesn't have a say in what private companies, how they want to invest their money.
Just kind of blow it away.
So right now he's a partner for the Artemis mission. He's working on the HLS. So, the developments that are being made there, we are paying attention to for Mars, looking to see what's applicable for Mars.
I don't think anybody's got enough money outside the federal government to do it. So he's gonna have to continue to come back to NASA to be part of contracts. And he's definitely gonna have to get the nuclear transportation propulsion work that other people are gonna do to enable him.
But right now, SLS is like $4 or $5 billion a flight. He can build 8 starships a year, launch them every 3 months until he gets it right. I mean, don't you think that eventually SLS is going to kind of disappear and this guy's going to take over the whole thing? So it's pretty obvious.
You just kind of summarized the debate.
It's pretty
All right.
obvious.
It's within the realm of possibilities, especially if Starlink continues to make billions a year for him. Yeah.
Okay, so for those of you online, we're having a raucous little debate here in the room about the efficacy of Elon Musk and whether or not he's just going to take over the world because he has the capabilities of building spaceships rapidly and more cheaply than what we're able to do with the SLS. So I'm
Able to make decisions.
able to make decisions, right?
Without Congress overlooking.
Okay, so I think there was one more question back here.
So, where do we stand on the hazard, the radiation hazard of humans?
You wanna
It seemed to have been a limiting factor before.
So I am not a medical expert. That is a question best left to the medical experts. So there's a couple of things you can do. You can try to get there and back as fast as you can to minimize exposure. You can protect what you can protect. When you're on Mars, the planet is shielding you from half of the radiation coming at you. There's kind of an interesting thing that the scientists tell me, the medical folks tell me is, we're all afraid of solar flares. It makes your cell phone act up. But when there's a solar storm going on, it actually disrupts the other kind of radiation that's coming at you. So there's some games you can play with the timing on when you can do your missions. All of that is getting factored in. There is in the last, I think it was the last set of white papers, we did address some of the crew medical challenges for Mars, and radiation was addressed in that white paper. So if you go to that link, you can pull it that way.
Say that again.
Yeah, I think it's doable. Yeah.
Okay. Going once. Going twice. I think we've got it.
Thanks for taking the time today.
Okay, so thank you very much. Really appreciated that. That was very informative. Like I said earlier, we're going to go ahead and post the charts that Michelle presented today. They do have several QR codes. The QR codes will allow you to get to all of the documents that she was talking about, the short ones as well as the ones that will be cures for your insomnia. So we should have the recording of this. There are going to be dropouts because we're getting kicked off, but ultimately we'll have this presentation up on the Now website. Should be a few days. So the next first Thursday meeting is going to be on September 5th. Also want to let everybody know that we are planning another social event. Can't get enough of those, right? The current date, Stokes, keep me, September 11th. Okay, who's going to be able to forget that date, right? So the next Now social will be on September 11th. So Stokes is telling us that the presenter for that is going to be the
Mike Saccardini?
No.
Oh.
It's the president.
is the president of Axiom. Okay, so we'll have more information about that up on the Now website, and ultimately ticket sales will go up on the Now website. So be watching for notifications about all of that. The other thing, for those of you who are online, thanks so much for bearing with us and for joining us today. We do have a keg of the month today out at the Bluebonnet Pavilion. So for those of you here in the room, you can meander your way over to the Bluebonnet Pavilion and have a few beers, or one or more. To you, for those of you who are online, you're going to have to do it virtually. So thank you very much for joining us today. Appreciate you all being here. Take care.